today. I think everybody who is going to come is here. My name's Karen Kendrick Hands, and I'm a new member of Rotary, but I feel like I've been a Rotarian a long time because I was an exchange student 46 years ago, and it was really important to me to do that, and I'm really happy to be here today. Paul is my co-chair of the Going Green Fellowship, and the Going Green Fellowship is relatively new to our club. We are still feeling our way, but one of the things we thought we would do is have some speakers. We know you've already sat through lunch singing a set of speakers, rah-rah about the volleyball team, and yet we are so grateful that you are also here to hear Dr. Jonathan Patz. I would like especially to welcome Dave Warren, who came all the way up from Janesville in our district. He is our district governor-elect, and that's a real sign of support for the initiative of the Going Green Fellowship here. And our fellowship had a warm reception at the conference this weekend in the Dells. The purpose of the Going Green Fellowship is to work to find projects that Rotarians want to do that will help our environment. One of the focuses of Rotary is making sure there's enough clean water for everyone on the planet. And our core concern is that we don't want to see greenhouse gas emissions and climate change undo Rotary's humanitarian work. If you aren't a regular member of the fellowship, we invite you to sign up just so you can get the emails that we send out, even if you can't make every meeting. And if you're from another club, we'd be delighted to capture your information because we're developing an environmental network within the district. And every Rotary club needs about 50 programs a year. We would be happy to be yours one week. I would like to introduce Dr. Patz. And you've already seen the bio and the invite letter, those of you who got the email. Pardon me from reading from my phone. But he's done so much, I'm afraid I'd leave something out if I didn't have this cheat sheet. Dr. Patz is the professor and director of the Global Health Institute at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. For the past 15 years, Dr. Patz served as a lead author for the United States Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, otherwise by us wonks known as the IPCC. That's the organization that shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore. And they made a lot of predictions, and unfortunately many of them are coming true. He's co-chaired the health expert panel of the U.S. National Assessment on Climate Change, a report mandated by Congress. He also served as the founding president of the International Association for Ecology and Health. In addition to directing the university-wide Global Health Institute, Professor Patz has faculty appointments in the Nelson Institute on campus, the Center for Sustainability and the Global Environment, SAGE, what a great acronym, and the Department of Population and Health Sciences. He also directs the National Science Foundation sponsored Certificate on Humans and the Global Environment Change. He is a delegate to the World Health Organization, which will be addressing the impacts of climate change on human health, and he's recently received a Fulbright Fellowship to support that work. I want to thank the Nelson Institute for taping today's session for both their use and possibly ours, and welcome you to one of Rotary International's 34,000 clubs, although we are number 5 and trying to be number 4. And you just heard the disclaimer, Mary Beth, that we are not Rotary International here. We are only 1/34,000th of Rotary International. But the person who just walked in is our district governor-elect. I'm sorry, no. She is on the board of Rotary International, and without the paper in front of me, I'm going to blow your last name. Mary Beth Brownie. Yes, the other hyphenated lady in the room. Thank you, Mary Beth, for coming, and Dr. Patz, thank you. He's going to speak for 25 minutes. He could go on for a full PhD level course. I want lots of time for interchanging questions, but save your questions to the end.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thanks.
Great. Now the Rotary International is intentional because Rotary Madison has a major global reach, and this is a global problem we're dealing with. So that mistake is just completely intentional. So I'm going to be talking about water resources and the interaction between water resources, our health, and the changing climate across the globe, and how we could be in serious trouble, and yet we also have some opportunities that are extremely timely if we think about it. Let me just give you a quick 101 on water resources, and this comes from my colleague, Professor Paul Block, who's a new professor at our university, an environmental engineer. And look at all the water represented on the Earth here. 97.5% of the water on the Earth's planet is salt water. We only have 2.5% that is fresh water, and a majority of that fresh water is tied up in glaciers. We've got about 30%, 31% of that 2.5% of the Earth's water in groundwater, and only 0.3% readily available in lakes and streams. So to keep this in mind when you look at this picture. This is what we're dealing with water resources. This droplet is all of the seawater. That droplet is glaciers, all the fresh water tied up in glaciers and snowpack. And can you see that tiny little dot there? Can you see? In the back, you probably can't even see that little dot. That's the 0.3% of readily available fresh water in lakes and streams. So that gives you a perspective of how sensitive water resources are. And if Earth's climate is changing and we're heating up the globe, this could evaporate and be gone, or it would be very, it's going to cause some problems. Now, yesterday in the news, the third national assessment of the United States was released, talking about how our Earth's climate is being disrupted by burning fossil fuel, putting up greenhouse gases that are disturbing the Earth's climate. And I'm sure you've seen pictures like this. This is actual measured temperature that's been warming over the last century, decadal averages, and this is looking at past climate, and you can see that it really has been warming. This is historical climate. It's warming, and the projection, of course, is that the Earth is going to be warming quite a bit more over the next century. We've already seen changes in the extent of ice melt in the Arctic, and you can see the land-based ice off of Greenland. The rate of ice melt is increasing, so that's a lot of fresh water tied up there. And you can see from the U.S. Geological Survey repeat photography project, where they take a picture of one place in time. This is in 1941, Glacier Bay, and they go the same day in the calendar year, and they take the same picture again in 2004, and you can see glaciers are disappearing all around the world. Now, regarding water resources, there are societies that really depend on that glacial melt. And if you think about people living in South America, this is a projection that all that ice that's built up in the Peruvian Andes will be gone in 25 years. Those populations are scrambling, wondering what they're going to do with, you can't survive without fresh water. So there are places around the world that are very vulnerable as the Earth's climate is warming up. So we already have trouble today regarding populations that are under stress from lack of fresh water. You can see in 1995, anything in the hot colors there is under more water stress, and you can see the projection for the future as the Earth's climate heats up. You can see the amount of water stress increasing. In fact, by the year 2025, according to some estimates, 2/3 of people around the world will be living in areas with water shortage or stress. So when you think about water shortage, one of the direct effects of water shortage, of course, is on agriculture. And if you look at this projection, this is from the journal Science a couple of years ago, this top image is mid-century, like 30 to 40 years from now. Everything in orange or red will have a 70% probability of having the hottest summer ever in their history. And on the bottom you can see everything in red has a 90% probability or greater of having their hottest summers ever in history. And the concern is that growing food, especially in the tropics, these crops are right at their temperature envelope. The crop modelers are estimating that hunger will increase dramatically. And simply by the middle of the century, today's close to 1 billion people that are already food insecure could double just by mid-century because of heating up of the earth. To me, I work in public health, and I'm not the climatologist. I ask the climatologist, give me your projections, and then we look at the impacts. And this is why, personally, I'm a public health scientist. I think this is one of our most challenging public health crises that we've ever experienced. That's my humble opinion. When you heat up the earth, you also heat up the oceans. And when you heat up the sea surface, you can get stronger hurricanes. Now, Typhoon Haiyan was, I think that's the strongest typhoon we've ever experienced. You can't say any single event is due to climate change, but we know a lot about hurricane dynamics. And it has been shown that as the temperature of as the temperature increases, this is Atlantic sea surface temperature, this is actually a hurricane strength index, and the number of type 4 and 5 hurricanes has increased globally in step with warmer sea surface temperatures. Now, this is not to say more hurricanes will hit a coast or will hit the United States. We don't know that. But what we do know is warmer sea surface temperature drives stronger hurricanes. And you can see this is the Earth's surface that has warmed in the last 100 years. You can see land and sea surface. The sea surface has been warming. Another aspect of warmer sea surface temperatures is that there are certain diseases that respond with warmer temperatures. If you look at temperature, this is in Lima, Peru. And we track temperature over time, and not surprisingly, you know, every summer it's high, and every winter it's low, up and down, up and down. Well, if you look at childhood diarrheal disease in Lima, Peru, the largest hospital in Lima, Peru, it goes up and down with the seasons. Now you can't tell necessarily that that's from temperature, because what if it's a seasonal effect? What if every summer the children are out of school playing in near a contaminated beach? You know, so you need to control for seasonality. And so we have natural experiments that occur, like El Nino. And in 1997, we had one of the strongest El Ninos on record. The temperature was 5 degrees centigrade, or about 9 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than normal. So in 1997, we basically did not have winter in Lima, Peru. So that's one way to control for that seasonality. We asked the question, well, what do we normally expect in the winter season for diarrheal diseases? We saw that that was 33% higher during El Nino, and interpreted that as showing that for every 1 degree temperature rise, you had a 7% increase in illness. So here's a direct effect of sea surface temperature and disease. But I want to tell you that as we heat up the planet, it's not all about, it's not just about temperature. It's also about extremes of the hydrologic cycle, the water cycle, more floods and more droughts. That's because you know that when you have hot weather, you have soil moisture evaporation, and you get droughts. But when do we get our heaviest thunderstorms? On very hot days, right? In the summertime. Because hot air holds more moisture. So when it rains, it can pour down very hard. So the idea of extremes of the water cycle, as you put more energy into the atmosphere, is something to be expected. The other aspect of climate change is sea level rise. As the Earth, as these sea surface temperatures rise, simply from warming of salt water, you get thermo expansion, and you have sea level rise. So where do a large number of people live around the world? On the coast. Lots of people live on the coast. And where do they get their fresh water from? Coastal groundwater, coastal aquifers. And what happens when sea level rises? You can get salination of the freshwater aquifer. So coastal areas just from sea level rise will lose their fresh water. So there's another threat there. So let's talk a little bit about this other aspect, extremes of the water cycle as you put more energy into the atmosphere. We have seen an increase in heavy downpours and flooding over the past few decades. And we all know, disasters with floods. We've seen this in our country, and certainly in many parts of the world. There's been devastating flooding and loss of life with floods. And I want to point this out, especially to the Rotary Club, because you're into providing clean water around the world. And I'd like to tell you a story about a relatively developed country called the United States, where if you think about how we handle our rainfall and our runoff, in our fairly developed country, we have what are called combined sewage overflows, these CSOs, where it rains so hard that surface water, which is contaminated with sewage, it will spill over. In other words, there are many systems that, because of the cost, combine stormwater runoff and sewage. Now we need to fix that, but it's a very expensive fix. There are still over 700 communities in the United States that combine stormwater runoff and sewage. And every year in the United States, more than 1 trillion gallons of sewage-contaminated stormwater overflows into surface waters every year. That would keep Niagara Falls running for 18 days with sewage-contaminated stormwater. So we have we can't even handle heavy rainfall. Now, why am I telling you this when this talk is about the Earth's climate being disrupted and affecting water supplies? It's because of the projection in the future, where the climatologists are telling us when it rains, you're going to get these very heavy precipitation events. This is looking at, like 2 inches a day of rainfall. These are really the gully washers, the really heavy rainstorms. The type of rain that we're going to see in the future is going to be really heavy rain. So if you see this picture here, today we can't handle heavy rainfall, and the rainfall is going to get that much heavier and more intense. That's a public health crisis. Yeah.
I know we're supposed to hold our questions, but
Especially-
can you
especially
explain
the
the
moderator.
difference between the blue, red, and white bars for us?
These are different emission scenarios. So the climatologists tell us, look, we can't predict the future. We can tell you different scenarios. What if we keep burning coal and oil and have business as usual? And that's the A2 high emission scenario up here. And what if we sort of go, with renewables and we curb our population slowly? Well, that's a medium scenario, medium emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels. That's the red. And then the yellow is saying, well, if we can get to a lower emissions, we'll have less of this effect. So the idea that more burning of fossil fuel and fueling this climate disruption, global climate disruption, the more we burn energy, the worse the outcomes will be. That's what those bars show. Yeah. Now we asked our question, what about this, nearby Chicago watershed with looking at future climate? You'd have these runoff effects, combined sewage overflows, 50 to 120% increase. So, and if anyone here from Milwaukee? Yes, good, all right. So every time it rains really hard in Milwaukee, my colleague Sandra McClellan goes out in her research boat and dips the water and shows high levels of E. coli bacteria. South Shore Beach, Bradford Beach, you can see the dark red and the flaming blue hot high levels of E. coli contamination, sewage contamination. Don't swim at these beaches after heavy rainfall. Now, I'm showing you this locally, but internationally, where you have less water infrastructure and lots of sewage contamination already, it's even a bigger threat. And we had some headlines on Monday. I'm sure you saw Monday's news about the World Health Organization calling for an emergency, a global emergency because of polio, an outbreak that this is an emergency. Now, the relevance here is, you all know, where does polio come from? How do people pick up polio?
Dirty water.
It's from dirty water. It's from sewage contaminated water. And so if we're talking about putting extra stress and extra dynamics as far as heavy rainfall, the projections are all around the world, the type of rainfall and the differences between drought and heavy rain, that's a huge strain on water systems. And so disrupting the Earth's climate is going to make controlling diseases like polio and leptospirosis and other diseases that are related to stormwater and wading through stormwater and basic sewage contamination, diseases like this will be at higher risk as far as spreading. And this was with the World Health Organization emergency. Actually, my friend is Bruce Aylward. We did our MPH together at Hopkins, and I'm going to be, actually, Karen mentioned that I'm going to be over in Geneva with the World Health Organization, working a little bit with Bruce Aylward.
Just,
And try to get him here, by the way.
Yeah.
Twist his arm.
and Bruce Aylward is,
Oh, Bruce Aylward, he is the head of polio eradication for the last
Health Organization.
30 years, no, 20 years at least. For the World Health Organization, Bruce he's headed up polio eradication program and is now the #2 person at WHO under the Director General, Margaret Chan. So Karen and I are going to work on getting him here, right? So I just want to remind you that when you think about disrupting the Earth's climate, we're talking about rising temperatures, rising sea level, and as I mentioned, hydrologic extremes of the water cycle. And we talked about some of the infectious diseases like waterborne diseases. There are all sorts of other climate-sensitive diseases that I'm really not going to talk about for this presentation. But if you look across all of these, air pollution, allergens, and asthma, malaria, mosquito-borne malaria, malnutrition and diarrheal disease, water supply, food resources, and environmental refugees, forced population movement. If you look across all of those, according to the World Health Organization, actually about 85% of these are mostly going to affect children. And if you think about how disturbing the Earth's climate will cut across all sorts of health outcomes, and you think about the Millennium Development Goals, trying to eradicate poverty and hunger, education, gender equality, childhood mortality, maternal health, and these other diseases, environmental sustainability, and partnerships for development. Thinking about the 8 Millennium Development Goals, at least half of them could be reversed or our progress impeded by a change in the Earth's climate. And when you think about these climate-sensitive diseases, and especially thinking about malnutrition, diarrheal disease, and vector-borne diseases, and asthma as well, I mean, this is a problem. You know, do we want to be working on these problems when there's something more upstream that continues to feed into exacerbating those problems? And this is where we need to take a two-pronged approach. We need to tackle these issues on the ground where there are emergencies, like someone coming into an emergency room that's bleeding on the floor. You need to stitch that person up and go after that immediate problem. At the same time, if you're not addressing crime that may have brought that person to the emergency room, or high blood pressure, which is a silent killer that, you know, affects a lot of people, if you don't look at those longer-term chronic issues and upstream issues, we will be mopping up the floor without trying to turn off the faucet. And we need to do both. Now, speaking of doing both, I'm going to end with some good news and tell you that when you think about what we're doing with the Earth's climate, we're disrupting the Earth's climate. 97% of climatologists working in this field agree, number one, climate change is real and it's human-induced. It's from burning fossil fuel primarily, and also cutting down the rainforests that suck up CO2. But 97% of climatologists in this field agree that the root of the problem is burning fossil fuel. It's human activity that's causing disruption of the Earth's climate. Well, what else does burning fossil fuel contribute to besides greenhouse gases? That, you know, like CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are putting a blanket over the Earth and trapping the heat and heating things up. Well, when you burn coal and oil, you also release particulate air pollution, sulfur dioxide, all sorts of nasty air pollutants that we know harm people. And according to this latest 2013 Global Burden of Disease report, this is a huge report, World Health Organization and many institutes around the world, the latest update is that every year there are 3 million people that die prematurely from air pollution, from urban air pollution. Another problem is that we are moving into an automobile-dependent society around the world. Countries that are developing are trying to copy the Western lifestyle. And in the United States, we know that inactivity and obesity and diabetes and heart disease, these are enormous issues that the CDC are saying, these chronic diseases are our #1 epidemic. And 60% of Americans don't meet recommended levels of exercise. So according to this latest assessment, more than 3 million people die prematurely from lack of physical activity. So why am I telling you this? It's because fossil fuel consumption and our reliance on a fossil fuel economy is causing these premature deaths from air pollution, but also contributes to physical inactivity because of over-reliance on motorized vehicles and lack of active transport from walking and biking. So what if we were to reduce fossil fuels? What would the benefit be if we were to reduce fossil fuels down to a level? I think this is what I can't remember how far down they were saying reducing CO2, tons of CO2, but if you were to reduce fossil fuel burning, I think it's to whatever the IPCC was calling for by the middle of the century or by 2030, we would have co-benefits. In other words, you reduce fossil fuels to prevent warming of the Earth, but at the same time, you get a benefit because of reduced air pollution. And because of that reduced air pollution, mostly from particulate air pollution, we would save up to 4.7 million deaths every year. And you can see where you have really polluted places like in China and India, they will see the most benefit, but this is a distribution around the world. But also, ozone is hazardous for health, but also damages crops. So if we reduce our carbon emissions, and we would see benefits in crop yields. And you can see here that there would be 30 to 135 million metric tons of increase in crop yields because of less ozone. So, reducing fossil fuels, it's not just about, having less warming of the earth. It's also a good idea anyway. Even if there was pretend there was no warming of the earth, which we know at least 97% of the climatologists are sure, hey, it's real and it's from human activity, but let's forget that. It's a good idea anyway to get to a low carbon economy and save that many lives from air pollution and increase crop yields. So next week, I'm testifying in the state legislature, and they're talking about energy. And, right now we have cheap energy, although I won't even talk about subsidies. It's not really necessarily a free market. It's a bit of a distorted market, but let's assume that energy is cheap right now. And to get to cleaner energy, it might cost up to $30 per ton of CO2 removed. Now, as wind and solar, especially wind, are becoming more and more competitive, I think that number is even lower. But let's be conservative and say it's going to cost up to $30 per ton of CO2. Well, why would you want to pay that? Why would you want to pay any more for energy? But that's that's less than one half of the equation. Let's look at the other side. Well, if you have less dirty fuel and cleaner air quality, according to several studies now looking at reduction in burning coal and oil especially, and what it would mean for air quality around the world, we would have a benefit to health of about $200 per ton of CO2 removed. And so I'm going to ask you a tough question. Which number is bigger? 30 or 200? Now if you if you just put your blinders on and say, I'm just going to focus on energy and forget everything that happens after I burn that coal, I'm just going to ignore the smoke and particulate matter that blankets, the downwind populations and kills people, up to 80,000 people a year, 88,000 a year in the United States. I'm going to forget about that and just say I don't want to pay more for coal. But if you open your eyes and say, wait a minute, when you burn coal, there are impacts. And if you weigh the health impacts, it makes sense that, that benefit from reducing fossil fuel consumption far outweighs the cost of going to cleaner energy. That is, I think, the most important message I can deliver, because to me, this really is a global health emergency. And it's an amazing opportunity as far as thinking about if we could get to a cleaner energy system, how much would benefit. I'm almost done, and go for it.
One problem with that is that the benefits are distributed across the entire population, and the cost is avoided by the big industries who produce that pollution.
That's the $64,000 question. That is, and that's why we have institutions that can balance fairness there. I mean, how many industries don't have to pay for waste? I mean, usually if you manufacture something, you have to pay for the cleanup. You dump something in a river, you're supposed to manage that and pay for it. The energy, the oil industry and the coal industry don't have to pay for what happens when they deliver their product and it gets consumed and waste is generated. That's the problem with it. It's not a free market.
Exactly.
It's exactly, and that's what that's where we have to have a real movement of organizations like Rotary and talking to decision makers. This is where that's exactly right. There's an imbalance. a matter of fairness. Yeah.
What are the components of that $200 change? Is that in healthcare costs, or what are the?
It's mostly, well, if you look at it, for the United States, that number would be about 50. So it'd still be, we would save $50 per ton of CO2 removed, because we would avoid mortality, hospitalization, lost work days, things like that, asthma, you know, and so that's a health care cost and a worker, labor, and lost labor, and also mortality. And then if you add in some of the, like in Asia and, those, they're so polluted that they would have much bigger benefit, but still, in the United States, a benefit of $50 outweighs $30, but globally, you can see it's 200 to 30. Yeah.
First, thank you for your presentation, everything you do. But I'm curious about what you said you're going to speak to the legislature and testify. What do you hope or think the Wisconsin legislature can do about changing the curve here?
Well, I'll just say I was asked specifically by the Transportation subcommittee, to talk about our study that we did last year, where we showed that if you took short car trips off the road in the upper Midwest, the 11 largest cities in the upper Midwest, what would the health benefit be? And we found that, short car trips, 2.5 miles, the short trips only in cities, not in the rural area. You take those car trips off the road, you'd save 400 lives per year. If you then ask the question, what if half of those car trips were done by active transportation on a bicycle? And because we're up here, in the Great Lakes region, only in the summertime. So summertime, 4 months in summer, half of the trips, what would that extra physical fitness benefit be? That would be more than 700 lives. So basically, swapping the short car trips for bicycle trips, or at least some bicycle trips, you could save 1,300 lives per year in our region. So we're going to be talking about the benefits of alternative transportation specifically. And I'll just end by saying that our Global Health Institute, I'm the director of the Global Health Institute at our university here. We're actually a unique institute. We are not in a school or a college. I report directly to the provost, which means that our institute is campus-wide, and we are leveraging strengths across campus. We're working with the College of Agriculture, looking at food security, and of course our strong schools in health sciences for global health issues, the vet school to look at ecology, wildlife disease, habitat and landscape change and disease, and of course with business and international studies, looking at sustainable development. So, and I forgot engineering. Environmental engineering is really key. So one thing that I want to point out is that, when you look at any of these problems, you need to embrace the interdependence of them. That we're talking about energy and population growth, development, and that if we try to focus on one thing at a time, let's say we go into a place and we provide fresh water, and we have wells for fresh water. Well, if we're not thinking about regional projections of water scarcity or land use change and other factors at the same time, or trends in urban sprawl, we can try to fix one problem and it'll just be covered up by something that we're not looking into. So that's why we're trying to take really a very interdisciplinary approach to these global health problems. We want to look at the root of these global health issues and bring together the expertise to take the most integrated approach of any global health institute in the country, if not the world. And we can do that in Wisconsin because we are a land grant university where we have these amazingly strong colleges all co-located, and it makes us able to work that way. So it's exciting to be working on these challenges of global, global scale, I hope that today I've shown you how, number one, our water resources, they're very sensitive. Fresh water is a precious thing, and there's not much of it. And any kind of disruption that will affect that water cycle will affect our health. And I hope that I've shown you also that our behavior as far as energy consumption actually has a domino effect and can affect our health and reverse our Millennium Development Goals if we don't take them on, which is why I am so thrilled that this committee within Rotary is up and running, because I think that without a real focus on environment, we really are not going to push forward the goals in improving health and well-being around the world. So thank you very much.
The clock on the wall says we have 2.5 minutes. If you haven't somehow or other left your email address with me and you would like access to this or the slides or follow up, please give me your contact information. Any more questions in the room? Thank you,
I
Carol.
get emails from you regularly on programs that you have, particularly at the Institutes for Discovery on global health issues. And are those not open to the public?
Oh, yeah.
So that would be something, if we wanted continuing information in all of these disciplines that you're intertwined with, we could
Right,
attend
and
further programs.
we are very linked into Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, the Nelson Institute. We're linked. You can see, I report to the provost. We are supposed to be the portal for all of global health across the campus. So, and most everything we do is open to the public. I can't think of anything that's not open to the public, to be honest.
So our email addresses could be passed on to you, and we could get
I would
regular
love that.
notices of
Absolutely.
That'd be
additional
fabulous.
programs that you present.
Because we have lots of exciting seminars, and crossing our fingers that I can twist Bruce Aylward's arm to get here. But,
He's kind of the polio rock star, and since Rotary has made such a tremendous commitment for the last 30, 40 years, is it, to eradicating polio, it'd be really wonderful to hear from the head dude.
I'll try to guilt him into it.
So I thank you again. I thank you for the Global Health Institute for making the taping possible today. Sorry, I got the wrong name. And contact information, please. From visiting clubs, we'll be happy to say you were here if you need a makeup. And for our club internal, here is a sign-in sheet. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Patz. You might have a couple minutes to stay around for individual. Next Going Green Fellowship is the first Wednesday in June. Thank you all.